Vietnam is a country in Southeast Asia that suffered through a war known as the Vietnam War. The fear of Vietnam being united into a communist country caused the Vietnam War, which in turn built distrust in the U.S. government because of the lies they told to the American citizens and Congress. All this started in the 1800s when France took over control of Vietnam for its rice, rubber, and other natural resources. Laos and Cambodia were also colonized by the French, which formed a single colony called French Indochina.
The people of Vietnam didn't really enjoy being colonized by the French. Many Vietnamese farmers grew meager while the French grew wealthy. Ho Chi Minh, a communist Vietnamese man, started to organize the Viet Minh army against the French for freedom. In 1946, war broke out between the Viet Minh and the French.
This war became known as the Indochina War. This war with the U.S. because at the time the U.S. was involved in the Cold War with countries like the Soviet Union and China. They feared that if Vietnam became communist, then the rest of Asia would too. This was known as the domino theory. U.S. President Harry S. Truman sent money to France to help them win the war, but Viet Minh won the north part of Vietnam anyways.
In 1954, France and Viet Minh signed a Ganava agreement dividing Vietnam into North Vietnam and South Vietnam, North Vietnam being communist and South Vietnam being anti-communist. The anti-communist government wasn't very favored with its people.
The North took advantage of this by using the Ho Chi Minh Trail to send soldiers and supplies to the uprising communists in the South.
However, the U.S. supported the South's anti-communist government and financed it with money and advisors. In 1955, North Vietnam broke into war with U.S.-supported South Vietnam. There is no declaration of war, so exact dates are vague, although it is widely accepted that the Vietnam War started on November 1st, 1955, and lasted for 20 to 30 years.
Later on August 2nd, 1964, the U.S. Maddox claimed that the North Vietnamese patrol boats fired torpedoes at them while they were patrolling in the Gulf of Tonkin. It was also claimed that a few days later that another U.S. boat was attacked by another North Vietnamese boat. President Lyndon B. Johnson got Congress to pass the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution. It allowed the U.S. to use military force in Vietnam. It was later established that the whole incident never happened at all, but this is still important because it really escalated the war.
At first, the force was limited to bombing, but a year later, by the end of 1965, there were 184,000 U.S. troops in Vietnam. That number grew dramatically with over 500,000 in 1968. That's over 2 times as many troops. The first American ground force to deploy were the U.S. Marines, who came ashore at Da Nang on March 8, 1965. At first, people thought the Americans would easily win because their army was much more advanced.
But it turns out a great deal of battles were fought in dense jungles. The U.S. Army was not properly trained for this kind of divergent environment, which is the main reason why the U.S. was not able to easily win the war.
The Viet Cong, the communist soldiers, fought a guerrilla war. They used small corps of soldiers to ambush the Americans and built immense tunnel networks to hide in. The U.S. government told the American public that they were about to win the war and that the Viet Cong were almost defeated.
However, in 1968, the Viet Cong initiated the Tet Offense, a massively coordinated attack on many targets throughout South Vietnam. This made the American public suspicious because they were told that the Viet Cong were almost defeated, but suddenly the Viet Cong initiated this complicated attack.
The American public became even more suspicious when they heard about the My Lai Massacre. The My Lai Massacre was a mass killing of hundreds of women and children by American soldiers.
Tưởng đâu là nó đứng nó chơi về, cuối cùng đứng lại nó xô xuống mương cây, nó bén đồng bò và cháy cháy. Rồi vừa xong lúc đó mẹ con tôi đã chung núp nằm với mấy người cháy kia, cháy trước ngã chặn tôi.
The massacre was documented and it really disturbed the American public. When the soldiers came home, they were treated as traitors even though they tried to defend the citizens.
Television coverage allowed the American public to have insight on the Vietnam War, making it the first war brought into American living rooms. People were shocked at what they saw, and the war at home became very disfavored. No one could tell who were the good guys anymore.
People who were drafted into war were very uneven between the low and high classes because enrollment in college or grad school earned you a deferment or a postponement from the draft.
All this caused many protesters to march against the war. A lot of the Americans who believed in the war thought the protesters were weakening the soldiers by lessening their support. These conflicts caused increased social tensions in America.
President Johnson eventually stopped sending more troops and refused to run for another term of president because of the war.
Accordingly, I shall not seek, and I will not accept the nomination of my party for another term as your president.
Richard Nixon became president in 1968 and promised to end the war.
I have asked for this radio and television time tonight for the purpose of announcing that we today have concluded an agreement to end the war and bring peace with honor in Vietnam. and in Southeast Asia.
But he didn't manage to make the peace until 1973 with the Paris Peace Agreement. The official end of the war was when Saigon fell to the north, making it what is known today, Ho Chi Minh City.
When the war finally came to an end, around 1.2 to 2 million North Vietnamese and South Vietnamese were dead. The U.S. military estimated that between 200,000 to 250,000 South Vietnamese soldiers and 58,000 U.S. soldiers died in the war.
The U.S. spent almost $1 trillion on the war. Once the American army drew out, the North Vietnamese invaded the South and unified the country under communist rule.
The Vietnam War had a lot of long-term impacts as well. During the war, the U.S. government lied about a lot of things that was happening. Before Vietnam, most of Americans entrusted the government even though they knew the government did horrible things. Near the end of the war, the trust diminished when the New York Times posted the Pentagon Papers, classified papers that showed the government has been misleading the public about the war for years.
The papers revealed that the military and non-military were lying about how the war was going and activities that they were doing. It was revealed that they didn't tell the American public and Congress that they were engaged in war with Laos and Cambodia. After the withdrawal from Vietnam, the public did not welcome back the over 1 million soldiers that served in Vietnam. Instead, they viewed them as maniacal and psychological killers. They were also called drug addicts because the soldiers' leaders were recommended drugs and stimulants to calm them. This caused them to end up coming home very hostile without the drugs.
The Vietnam War is also a main reason why we won't be seeing any more wars like this anytime soon. The American public just wouldn't allow it. Overall, the Vietnam War was a very disturbing, ugly, and unpopular event that impacted the way people trusted the government, America denouncing war, and Vietnam now being a communist country.